Welcome to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share my recent interview with James Peterson. James is a second-year student in our Full-Time MBA Class of 2021, and he is also the leader of a student group called the Sobriety Initiative. I recently connected with James via Zoom to talk a bit more about his background, what led him to Darden, how he spent this past summer, and what attracted him to his role in the Sobriety Initiative. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. So without further ado, here is my interview with James Peterson. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of our conversation today, I just want to check in and see, how are you doing? How's everything going? You doing all right?
Yeah, life's busy, but it's good. That's kind of how I like it. So.
All right. So second year is officially underway for you, correct?
We are off and running as of, I think, 3 weeks ago. So we're kind of underway here.
If you don't mind my asking, what are you taking this quarter?
This quarter, I'm in private equity and entrepreneurial finance. I'm in venture capital. I am in data science, pricing, and building a professional sales force.
So pretty
a full schedule on my plate here.
Yeah, pretty diverse set of classes. How did you think about the classes that you were taking? Were they just things that struck your interest? Do they align with the professional interests that you have?
Well, Stephen, I'll tell you, I was a sociology major in my undergrad, and the nice thing about being a sociology major is that you can just scroll through the course catalog and pick classes based on the most interesting name. So I actually employed the same strategy this year.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because we get a lot of questions on the admissions end from prospective students who are asking about concentrations and specializations. And what we oftentimes share is, sure, they're there. You can use them to guide your course selection. But in our experience, second year students are oftentimes just taking classes that are of interest, and they either taken this class with a faculty member they really like, or the course title seemed really interesting, or they've always been curious about the subject. It's not always completely driven by a specialization or concentrating in a particular area.
Yeah, I took a look at kind of the concentration list, but the fortunate thing is that I have a broad set of interests, and so a high likelihood that if I pick something interesting, that it's going to overlap with one of those disciplines. And I'm sure I might have to take a more strategic approach kind of in later quarters, but at this point I'm in good shape.
Well, glad to hear you're off to a good start. And a bit of a softball question to warm things up here. Tell us a little bit more about you. What did you do before coming into Darden? What was your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Detroit, Michigan. Before I came to school, I was working as an outside consultant for General Motors, and I specialized in data analytics and data operations. And so they had launched a loyalty program, and I had familiarity with both analytics and data ops, but also loyalty marketing. I started my career at MGM Grand, the casino. And so in the casino business, all marketing is loyalty marketing. And so they brought me in, and it was an awesome project. And probably most interesting about it is General Motors has a lot of different facets to the business, between, core automotive brands like Chevy and Cadillac, but also a financial arm, a credit card, a couple of different areas. They were involved in Lyft at the time, and a service called Maven as well. And so kind of tethering all of that, the whole customer experience with General Motors into a single umbrella was it was a fun and interesting challenge, interfacing with a lot of teams.
I can imagine. Was an MBA something that you had always thought about doing? You had mentioned it being a sociology major. I wonder if it was a relatively recent idea, or if it goes back a ways.
No. So, pretty much after I left my undergrad, I knew pretty confidently that I would want to go back to graduate school. So I majored in political science and sociology, and I had a business minor. And so when I started working professionally, it was it was really clear to me that there was, obviously I developed a lot of, primarily critical thinking skills that I could apply to like a professional setting, but kind of formalized knowledge, there was a lot of gaps. Things like finance and things that, you know, are difficult to learn if you're not, picking up on the job experience. And so I was interested in potentially law and potentially an MBA. I also considered a dual degree, but um, if I'm being really honest, I took the GMAT, and then when it came time to take the LSAT, I took a hard look at how much I loved reading, and the answer was not enough to be a lawyer. So
Well, that's important to know before you go to law school, but before you embark upon that path. That's a good threshold question. You do get to do some reading at Darden, though.
yeah, I think that's the great irony is that, because I took my GMAT maybe a year or two before I applied to business schools, and to circle back and to land at Darden doing the case method and doing quite a bit of reading as it is. And so I honestly, though, the way the case method works, I think dovetails quite well with how I like to learn, which is a very engaged style. And so um, I take the reading as necessary in order to enjoy a classroom setting that I think has been great for learning.
Yeah, I can imagine if you were interested in at least thinking about law school, how the case method, the Socratic approach, the learning style at Darden, with that reading component and critical thinking and the analysis aspect of it would appeal. I can completely understand that. So with that said, what led you to Darden?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I took my GMAT actually relatively quickly out of undergrad, maybe only a year and a half after I graduated. And I was working at MGM at the time. And then I sat on my score for 1 year. And then I applied to a couple of schools the next year. And I was rejected from all of them, which was good. It was a good learning experience. I really don't think I understood kind of the application process or how involved it was prior to that. And then when I came back and applied the next year, I kind of looked with a more critical eye on what the criteria was, and it seems kind of fluffy, but I didn't want to live in a city, um, and I wanted to go to a top flight business school program, so that thins the herd uh, considerably. Uh, I was already in Detroit and wanted to make an exit from Detroit, and so that left a pretty narrow list. And I was very fortunate to get the opportunity to uh, apply and interview at Darden, and I've been very happy with the decision to come here.
I'm sure some of our listeners are reapplicants. I'm wondering what changed in your approach, or what did you do differently the second time around, as you thought about putting forth a really strong application?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first time I went through the application process, I was interested in providing schools with, in terms of my essay, with the right answer. Um, you know, where because all the essay questions are kind of designed to evoke some sort of a response in terms of where have you been and where would you like to go and how does this fit into the picture here. And I was trying to kind of curate what I felt like was the right answer. And I'll tell you, when I applied the next year, in particular with my Darden application, I did not pull any punches in terms of being very candid about who I was, how I got here, um, you know, a degree of real openness and honesty that I don't think I exhibited the year prior. And I was willing to do that because, uh, I felt kind of very confident that honesty was going to yield positive results, and it did.
I think that's great advice. I think, as we oftentimes will share with with candidates, there's a tendency when crafting those short answer responses to focus on what people think our admissions committee is looking for in
Mm-hmm.
those answers and responses. The reality, the best answers are the ones that are really authentic, and the person is sharing something and it feels natural and real. And so I'm not surprised to hear your feedback there. That also there's the reality of our admissions committee reads, hundreds, thousands of responses to those questions. We've kind of developed a filter for when people are, writing maybe what they think we expect versus what is really how they feel, and what feels like a really authentic answer. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because there's a lot of value in taking that approach. I mean, be as open and as candid as you can be through the application process, because ultimately you're going to bring all of that with you to the classroom. And we want to get to know the real person as well, because that will help us get a sense of not only who you are, but who you'll be at Darden.
Yeah, and I'll actually take that a step further too, because as soon as you arrive at Darden, it's strikingly apparent, what type of an emphasis the school puts on diversity. And I mean, diversity of thought, background, career expertise, racial, ethnic, religious, you know, these are all, deeply, deeply personal things. And so I don't know that it's even possible to embody the type of diversity that Darden is looking for if you're not being authentic and genuine about who you are as an individual and how you'll fit into kind of that mosaic.
Yeah, we are always thinking about that classroom environment, right? The case method, we talked about it here earlier, about who you'll be and how you'll contribute to your classmates' learning experience. Of course, that also is on the team level too, right? As a learning teammate, a small group that you're working with to prepare for class, debrief after class. We're thinking about all of these interactions, of course, and outside the classroom. As we'll talk about a little bit later in our conversation, students play a really active role in shaping life at the Darden School. That's the tradition at the University of Virginia with student self-governance. So thinking about all these things, and there's no other way to get at that than try to think about the full application and who the person is behind all the materials. So I'm curious about your first year, James, the adjustment to business school. What was your first year like?
I think my first year, if I had to describe it in a couple of words, I would say eye-opening. You know, when I arrived here, you're signing up for something that's going to be intense, but it may sound arrogant. It certainly feels arrogant at the time, but my thought process coming in was like, I had a pretty hard job before I came here. I worked a lot. I don't know that it's going to go kind of above and beyond that. It was eye-opening. We touched on kind of the diversity, but I think one of the seminal moments in the first couple of weeks was, you go around class and do introductions on the first couple of days, and every person in my section of 65 people was, and I'll watch my language here, but a total BA, just like a total, they're awesome people, and they're just like shockingly impressive. And I think equally important to that is like the moment that comes, your ego gets punctured a little bit and you're like, oh no, who am I? How do I fit into this? And then, I think equally important, a couple of days later, you're sitting in class and you have a contribution that really helps shape class discussion. And you'll have a second moment where you're like, oh, wow, holy cow, I think I belong here, which is, that's a profound moment. But I will say the first year comes at you very fast, things scale up. And I think the school actually probably kind of intends to do this, but they throw a lot of very diverse priorities at you. Things are coming at you from a social angle, from a recruiting angle, from a class angle, from a happiness and wellness angle. And the temptation I think that everybody has in that first year is to get an A+ in all of those areas. And, life is a lot happier when you give up on that pursuit and really focus on what's important to you. And so I think that's kind of what got refined over the course of the first year, was a willingness to really commit to some facets of, the experience, and feel very comfortable putting things in kind of rank order of importance to you.
And I think that's a great point. And the time management piece is really hard, I think, for most students. I mean, you've already had to manage your time, you've been working and all these kinds of things, but the number of things you want to do simultaneously is a challenge.
Yeah, and there's literal calendar conflicts which will arise, and you will have to make choices about which one you will commit to. And so, that feels very uncomfortable at first, but it's for me, it was a year of growth. I think for many people here, it's a year of growth, and it's specifically that because you're forced to make those tough decisions and to really put your efforts behind something that you want to see manifest into positive results.
When you reflect back on who you were as an incoming student versus where you are now, where do you see some of that growth? How have you grown up across this 1 year or so?
I would say I arrived here taking myself very, very seriously. I think I probably still do, more so than I should, but I think that's been course corrected quite a bit. And I think that's quite natural. When you come to a school like this, I just talked about going around the classroom, and everyone is impressive and has excelled in whatever area of life or whatever area of the world that they were operating in before they came here. And so there's just an air of really excellent performance. And I think for me, it was very natural to have a reaction where I tried to prove myself within that structure, and then ultimately kind of come to a more peaceful state of being where, I'm not at odds with any of this. All of these people are tremendously impressive, and their impressive does not detract or amplify mine in any personal way. And so you've got to really kind of focus on, identifying, the value that you see in yourself and kind of refining that. And for me, at least, that has yielded a much lower blood pressure and a much higher, state of satisfaction. And I always got along with everybody at school. And so that wasn't one of those things, but I think it's much more fun to get along with everybody when you're able to kind of extract your ego out of the equation to whatever degree is possible.
I'm guessing for many of our listeners, what you just shared there is probably more introspective and personal than what maybe people had in mind for your answer. Is that surprising to you? Maybe. And I guess what I would say to that is, if that is more introspective, maybe than what you're used to as a listener, then this is a tremendous opportunity to sit and kind of reflect on that, right? Because I tried unsuccessfully to be a fairly mindful person, and we'll kind of talk about the reasons why that is. When I arrived at school, and I found that I was much better at understanding mindfulness than putting it into practice. And I think the rigor of Darden, and also just the strength of the community, the sense of fellowship you get with your peers and your faculty and the administration, is something that helped me kind of put rubber to road, so to speak, on being mindful and introspective as a practice rather than as a concept. No, I think it's a great point, and I'm so glad you shared the things that you just shared, because the nature of any transformational experience, which is what Darden sets out to do for all students, requires a lot of self work. right? This kind of understanding of who you are and your strengths and how you can contribute to a conversation and your value and these kinds of things. I think so much about what you shared, the imposter syndrome, and then sort of coming around to realizing, no, I belong here. That all feels very authentic, James. And I really appreciate your sharing that here as part of this conversation. I'm curious about what you did this past summer. Know that it was perhaps a different summer than maybe what you had imagined as you were starting out your first year. But what did you do this past summer?
Yeah, so it was definitely a different summer than I had envisioned. During my first year, I recruited for consulting, and I was very fortunate to spend the summer with a firm. And I was supposed to be in New York City. And to be honest with you, I've never lived in New York. I'm not from New York. I recruited exclusively for New York in my first year because I wanted to spend the summer there and dip a toe and see how I like the water. And so obviously that wasn't an opportunity that was available to me this summer, but I had a tremendous experience with the firm I interned with, and it was a great learning experience. And there are benefits to doing your internship from your apartment. I think all the jobs that people recruit for here at Darden will require to some degree long hours, but sometimes it's nice to do long hours in your apartment as opposed to in an office or on a client site. And so it allowed some flexibility, which was incredibly nice.
Yeah, I can understand that point. And I know, it sounds like it was a little bit different than what you had in mind, but I'm glad to hear that you still had a good summer, maybe with a little bit of benefit of work-life balance, so to speak, being able to work from home.
Yeah, it can be difficult almost to create the balance in the day to day, but where I really took advantage of it was I was able to go home for the 4th of July and spend a week at home. And then, I had some family stuff going on at the tail end of the summer, and I was able to go home for that as well and, work from my parents' basement. And I don't know that my parents really understand what I do or what I did over the summer, but it was nice nonetheless to be able to go and spend some time with them, which can be a challenge because your schedule fills up very quickly here with work and also with fun activities. Your parents may ask, "Are you coming home for spring break?" And the answer is, "No, I'm going to Costa Rica with my friends for 2 weeks." And so it was nice to be able to spend a little time. Plus, Michigan in the summer is unparalleled in beauty and splendor.
The reason for inviting you on the podcast, in addition to learning more about your background, James, is an organization that you're involved with, or I should say an initiative that you're involved with here at the Darden School. One of the ongoing goals we have here with the podcast is talk about the many ways in which students are shaping the extracurricular experience life here at the Darden School. As mentioned earlier in the conversation, student self-governance is alive and well here at the university, and it certainly applies at the Darden School of Business. And so you're part of something called the Sobriety Initiative. And just as we were getting ready for this conversation, it sounds like this is something of a personal passion for you. You want to talk a little bit more about what the Sobriety Initiative is and maybe how you got involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sobriety Initiative is kind of something that I kicked off in Q4 of last year. And so quarantine had gone into effect. I found quite a bit of time on my hands. And so some of those items that had been lingering around as thoughts got put onto paper and got put into action. And, the Sobriety Initiatives really kind of focused on two primary goals. The first one is to improve inclusivity for students in Darden's community who don't drink. We have a lot of students who go to school at Darden who don't drink for religious or cultural, personal or health reasons. And I just felt like there were some, relatively straightforward changes that could be made at school to kind of improve the environment for those students. And then the second priority is to increase the resources and the availability of resources, and kind of also the sense of community among students who actively abstain from alcohol consumption.
What brings you to this work? Why are you so passionate about this?
To be honest with you, what really kind of sparked the idea was that I thought about my own personal kind of experience coming to Darden. When I arrived on campus, so I'm an alcoholic. When I arrived on campus, I was 3 years sober. And, moving to a new place from anywhere across the world and quitting your job and starting school can be an upheaval. But for me, there was kind of an added layer of apprehension around that, just because I knew that I had to stay very focused on keeping sobriety as a priority for me. And it also, it adds a strange, I'm very comfortable in drinking situations, but it adds kind of a strange layer of social stress in the sense that I know, when I'm at home, my friends don't ask me if I want to drink, because they just know what the situation is. And when you move to a new place and you're making a ton of new friends, you're just naturally going to encounter more situations where people are meaning well and they're very kind people, but they're doing something that may, it just provides like a little bit of like stress or strain in a social situation. And so, when I moved here, I was quite confident that I would be the only person in my situation, in my Darden class. And I was very fortunate to find out in maybe the first week or two. I think I went to the Welcome Back barbecue, and I was standing next to somebody in line and piling pulled pork onto my plate. And, they asked something to the effect of, "You're not drinking?" And I said, no, not me. And they're like, "Not tonight?" And I was like, "No, I never drink." And they said, "Oh my God, me too. I'm so glad that there's somebody else." And we sat down and talked for 45 minutes, an hour. And, over the course of the year, I found, a handful of other people who were in similar situations. And so I think kind of that early apprehension and, whatever risk, if any, is associated with, an upheaval of your life priorities and processes that you're used to before you move to Charlottesville, I felt like could be positively addressed just with, something as simple as somebody willing to reach out and put themselves out there and talk about their experience.
It can be hard in an unfamiliar environment for people. I mean, as you're getting started, certainly Darden, you're in your second year now. It feels much more familiar to you, but as you're getting started, it can be hard for people to be vulnerable, particularly in graduate school, where I think there's a tendency to feel like everybody has everything figured out. And it can be challenging to share in this way. Is that something you've encountered, or that maybe that wasn't as much of a challenge?
Oh, I think that feeling that you just described is I think that affects everyone. When you come to a new place and you don't have your bearings straight, I think there's a lot of temptation, especially in these early weeks, to look at everything that happens through the lens of yourself, which is stressful and burdensome and, completely unnecessary. Because, and that's what happened with me. You know what I mean? Like, you show up to class, you don't know anybody. Okay. Like, who am I going to sit with at lunch type of a thing? And, it'll grow and it'll happen over time, but it takes a little time for you to realize and to kind of like lean into the fact that this is a very welcoming and accepting environment. I would say I'm probably more prone to being an open book than, I probably index a little higher on that than the average person, but I'm very familiar with those feelings of fear and anxiety and, oh shoot, who am I in this big sea of people? And what am I going to do? And how am I going to do? And you know what I mean? Like, the word I was coming into my mind too often. And so anything that I can do, as a second year, um, to kind of ease that transition. And if the only thing that I do is for a couple of people in the first year class, to give them one person that they know in town who they can text and say, hey, how's it going? Or help them out if they have a question on like how to schedule time with Debbie, or you know how does recruiting even work? Should I start working on my resume today? You know what I mean? If I can just be the contact for one person, I mean, that's all I was looking for. But we've had a warm reception, and we found some wonderful people in the first year class who I hope that they were happy to find a group of kind of people in a similar boat.
So you had mentioned some easy changes, some things that you'd push for that you thought would have a really positive impact. What are some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of the most visible one that, right, that kind of jumps right off the page at you is alcohol-free DSA dues. And so DSA is the Darden Student Association. It's like student government. And so at the beginning of your first year, they'll collect dues. And I'm not just saying this because I'm a member of DSA, but DSA dues are an incredible value to students at Darden, because they're used to throw social events. They're used to host welcome events. And there's just, if you try, you can get a tremendous amount of value out of what you pay into DSA dues, but a portion of what they pay into is, beer at a welcome back barbecue, or an open bar event at some other juncture throughout the year. And, it's not a big deal, but it's also, just kind of like a small showing of solidarity with our non-drinking community that we just built in there, that, if you want to opt out of paying the alcohol portion of the dues, you're welcome to. So I think that was kind of like right out of the gate. That was one of the things that we tried to kind of take down, and because I'm on DSA, I was fortunate to have a platform. I just tossed it on the weekly agenda, and we worked through it technically, and we made the change.
That's great, and these kind of things matter, as for signaling value, but also just so that people know it's something that the DSA is thinking about, because the DSA represents all students.
Yeah, absolutely, and passionately so. And I'll compound that, because it's not just DSA that represents all these students, but OSA in particular. I worked with Sarah Elliott on the Sobriety Initiative basically from day one, and you couldn't really have more helpful resources than what you have in the OSA. I sat down, I set a meeting with Sarah. First of all, she made time to set a meeting with me. We sat down, we talked about it. She said, "This sounds like a great idea. How can I help?" And my strong suspicion is that that's her interpretation for almost every initiative. So, when you say student self-governance is important at Darden, I think it absolutely is, because if you have an idea of something that should be done or might be fun or is in need, if you bring it to OSA and come with a plan, and they're going to back you 100%. They'll put you in the meetings that you need to be in, but they'll let you drive the bus. And to me, that's A, tremendous learning opportunity, but B, that's it's quite nice to be able to create something in alignment with the vision that you have in your mind.
Yeah, and for our listeners, the Darden acronym scorecard at home, the DSA is the Darden Student Association, OSA is the Office of Student Affairs. Sarah Elliott has been on the podcast before to talk about student life, student organizations, James, not surprised at all by your feedback. I know Sarah. She loves the work that she does with students here, and that's probably one of the great things about being an OSA is how you get to basically give students a platform to have an impact.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate to work with Sarah on a variety of things. My role with DSA and obviously the Sobriety Initiative, a couple of other projects. So her and I have a couple of meetings a week at least that we get to kind of sit around and hash out what the next step is in a couple of these things.
So how do you, kind of picking up on something you were talking about earlier, how do you create a community of people who kind of say, hey, look, I don't drink, I abstain. How do you help people who identify in this way connect with each other? Have you taken some steps to help foster that community?
Yeah, so, before this year, it was very organic in the sense that over the course of the year, we all kind of got a familiarity with who each other were. Coincidentally, or perhaps not coincidentally, we're all pretty close friends. And so, it was very organic in years past. And we share common interests, obviously, kind of in lending each other support in that capacity, but also just in general, we share common interests. But this year, obviously, to kind of accelerate that, to accelerate that curve, I made a post in kind of the admitted students blog this year, which was, at the recommendation of Sarah. And, it had a response that I was not really expecting, which was that a bunch of students reached out, a handful of students reached out to me and they said, hey, thank you for writing this. This applies directly to me. I would very much like to be involved. And so I just, created a little Teams channel, and we have a Teams channel together. And so, at this point, we're not, hosting events, and we're not kind of like a social hangout, but we're plugged in with each other, and we know who each other are, which I think is kind of the big hurdle to get over, right? That's the biggest holdup in being able to find that connection. And as soon as you find one person, then just like that, you're not alone.
James, I'm sure we have listeners out there who are listening to this conversation and saying, gosh, this really resonates with me. First, if someone's interested in the Sobriety Initiative, how do they connect with you? How do they connect with the group of students that you kind of help create?
Oh, absolutely. So, if you're listening to the podcast and you're interested, and if you're an applied student or an admitted student, send me an email. I'd be happy to take a minute and just chat about what my experience has been. Or if you just want, general thoughts from a general guy about the application process or anything else, I'm happy to talk.
Any final words of advice for our prospective student listeners? Anything you'd share with them?
I would just say proceed with confidence, because, to be listening to the podcast is to be an involved applicant, to be somebody who is taking an active interest in what my opinion is a tremendous and constructive next step in your life. And so, you're a winner just by that fact alone. And, the turmoil, there will be turmoil around applications. There will be turmoil around coming to school and making plans and, what your future looks like afterwards. But those are problems for another day. You know what I mean? You can only cross those bridges when you come to them. And so there's no sense in worrying about any of that stuff until, be proactive, but, don't lose any sleep over things that you can't control. And if you decide to come to business school, and if you decide that you would like to come to Darden, know that you're coming to a tremendous place with a tremendous community, people who are as kind as they are intelligent, and that's not something that maybe I expected when I came here. I thought I would come with a lot of people who are very motivated, you know what I mean? But maybe lacking that self-awareness that we talked about earlier. And that's not really what I found. What I found is kind and introspective and challenging peers. And so it's a wonderful place. And for, what it's worth, quit your job as early as possible. and hopefully we will have emerged from the pandemic and things, will have returned to some version of old normal. I know we're all just getting warmed up to the new normal, but I'd be welcome to old normal and travel and spend some time and relax and take in some sun before you show up, because once you're in Charlottesville, it's gonna be awesome, but it's gonna be intense. And so take some time to decompress.
Well, James, thank you so much for carving some time out here for the podcast. Appreciate your candor and your openness to the conversation. Appreciate all the work that you're doing on behalf of all students here at the Darden School. And hope you stay safe and take care, and best of luck with the classes you're taking this quarter. Sounds like you have a great slate.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And that was my interview with James Peterson, a second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2021. Of course, if you're interested in learning a bit more about the Sobriety Initiative, James was kind enough to allow us to share his email address here on the podcast. So if you're interested in connecting with James, he can be reached at Peterson, that's Peterson, J as in James, 21 at darden.virginia.edu. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN at virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.